So what are the basic steps when setting up a statistical study? Well, first thing you want to do is you want to know your goal. You have to have a goal in mind. What is it about your population that you want to learn, right? What do you want to study and what do you want to learn? And is it something you can actually learn, right? Then you need to choose a representative sample from the population. You need to collect the raw data from the sample and summarize these data by finding the sample statistics. We can then use these sample statistics to make inferences about the population parameter. And then we need to draw conclusions and determine what we learned and whether we achieved our goal. We need to be careful of a few things. So first is that we don't introduce bias, right? Bias in a statistical study is when a statistical study suffers because it was designed to favor certain results. So for example, the Nielsen Media Research Company, they earned money by charging television companies for their services, right? So Nielsen provides ratings for NBC TV shows, right? They're the ones who conduct the surveys. Why doesn't NBC simply do their own ratings instead of paying a company like Nielsen to do them? Well, we trust Nielsen because they're kind of a third party, right? We wouldn't want them to conduct studies on themselves. So, how could I sample badly? Well, a sample that's selected by taking members of the population that are easiest to reach is called a convenient sample. And that's not your best way to sample. It's really not. Uh, the design of a sample is biased if it favors certain outcomes, and the location of where you're conveniently sampling people, depending on the population makeup of where you are, it could introduce bias. Another thing is that when it comes to like surveys, like if you're giving a survey, people who take the trouble to respond to an open invitation are not representative of any clearly defined population, right? They may feel strongly about an issue already, such as gun control or and things like that. A voluntary response sample, right? That's when people like voluntarily respond to a survey. Also, has a lot of bias because only those with strong opinions, like I said, are most likely to respond. So the purpose of our sample is to give us information about a larger population. The process of drawing conclusions about our population from our sample data is called inference. We're making an inference, we're inferring. And we should rely on random sampling primarily because it eliminates bias in selecting samples from a list of available individuals. And there are laws of probability that allow trustworthy inference about the population if we do pick it randomly. Results from random samples come with a margin of error, right? We're going to learn how to calculate that later on. But they set bounds on the size of the likely error. And the larger your sample, the better information it's going to give you about your population than smaller samples. But lastly, a couple words of caution. So when it comes to surveying, good sampling techniques need us to reduce all possible sources of error. So one thing we need to look at is undercoverage. So this would be if groups of our population are left out in the process of choosing our sample. Non-response, so when an individual chosen for the sample can't be contacted or refuses to participate, right? So we've picked our sample, and then if everyone in our sample doesn't participate or doesn't get their survey in on time, that can be problematic as well. A systematic pattern of incorrect responses in a sample survey leads to response bias. What if your questions are worded poorly and you don't know how to answer them properly? Wording is the most important influence on answers given in a sample survey. So you need to make sure your word is without bias or negative and positive connotation. When it comes to technology, using personal one-on-one interviews to do surveys is very expensive. So this is now most studies are being conducted with technology-based data collection like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, right? But some issues with that is we used to have a thing called random digit dialing. I haven't ever gotten one of these calls because of call screening. Now no one picks up their phone. When you had a landline, there was a time when you didn't know who was calling. Dating myself. Okay, so you can't just randomly call people and hope they pick up. There's also lots of places with no landline, right? Web surveys are used more frequently, but are difficult to do well, and like I said, have like low response rates. So therein lies some cautions about sampling and how to pick a representative sample. Stay tuned for chapter 9.